powerful millionaire publicly shames Maid, but her hidden revenge will amaze you. Lily Thompson could hardly breathe, her heart racing in sync with the thumping bass of the gala music. The polished ballroom shimmered with opulence, yet she felt like a ghost, an invisible spectator amongst the perfectly manicured elite. The chandeliers cast a glow on bodies adorned in velvet and silk, while she stood in her modest black dress, a near replacement for the ones that had long faded from her wardrobe. This was her chance for Emma, a glimpse into a world where her daughter could dream bigger. Yet standing there, the sense of inadequacy overwhelmed her. "What am I even doing here?" she thought, scanning the faces of the socially elite, each wearing expressions of detached amusement. Her stomach knotted as the evening's event unfolded. She discounted her worth, seeing herself merely as Richard Blackstone's cleaner, an echo of the constant dismissal she faced. Struggling to suppress her cynicism, she reminded herself this was more for Emma than it was for her. The hope shimmered faintly within her. When Richard approached the microphone, anticipation electrified the air. Charisma poured from him like champagne. But as he began to speak, the atmosphere shifted sharply. With a pointed finger, he honed in on her, mocking her presence, belittling her work. "People like her are why our society is failing," he said, laughter bubbling through the crowd. The gasps echoed like gunshots. Each word struck at her vulnerability, igniting her anguish. The heat flooded her face, humiliation coiling tight around her chest. She whispered to herself, "Why do I do this?" The laughter swirled around her, her flesh prickling from the caustic energy in the room. "I've sacrificed my dreams for Emma. How could he not see the struggle behind my smile?" The fierce pain of inadequacy gnawed at her insides, pushing her thoughts into dark corners she couldn't afford to dwell in. Fragments of her grandmother's stories filled her mind. Tales of women who carved paths through the dust of despair, refusing to bow. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With every passing moment, that ember of defiance flickered to life. She used to write, long ago, essays brimmed with potential. Hand trembling, she felt drawn to her old journal hidden beneath crumpled bills and faded recipes. Words dripped onto the pages, spilling pain and passion. The freedom of defining her own narrative felt intoxicating, but so did the fear. Could she confront Richard? Would her voice matter? Each thought spiraled deeper, terror coiling in her chest as she recalled his mocking words. What if vulnerability led to more humiliation? What if this hope shattered under scrutiny? Underneath the anger crystallizing in her veins was a creeping doubt. Her shoulders squared as she gathered every ounce of courage. She couldn't let fear floor her. The women's empowerment seminar was approaching, and her journey demanded clarity. If anything was left to claim, it was her right to be heard. The irony burned. Could she really disrupt the world that had belittled her while attempting to illuminate her daughter's future? As she stood backstage, the dim lights contrasting against the buzz of the audience, Lily hesitated. Her heart hammered. This confrontation churned anger and fear into a whirlwind. The moment of truth loomed ahead of her, both terrifying and exhilaration wrapped tightly. She could feel the weight of her journey ready to burst forth, her heart racing faster, echoing the clarity of her mission. Would she spill her truth, or shrink into the corners of silence and shame? A chorus of uncertainty thrummed through her. Today might just be the day she could finally reveal herself. The real fight was only beginning. Lily's heart raced wildly, each pulsation echoing her internal struggle as she hovered on the precipice of transformation. The stage lights warmed her skin, illuminating 10 years of silent suffering seeping through her veins. This wasn't merely about Richard Blackstone's contemptuous jibes, or the laughter that skittered through the crowd. No, it was about reclaiming the power that had long been stripped from her. As she listened to the murmurs of the audience, their idle chatter in stark contrast to the storm brewing within her, a flicker of something primitive ignited. She would be unyielding. The very thought of what Emma deserved fueled her resolve, a future free from the constraints that had shackled her for so long. With each heartbeat, the flashbacks of her past rolled in like an ominous tide, but now they painted a different picture. She remembered her grandmother's weathered hands, writing by candlelight, crafting letters filled with truth and resilience. Those pieces had shaped her worldview, illustrating the importance of voice and courage. Lily was a vessel of that legacy, and she was done being silent. The chamber quietly swayed with anticipation. It was time to rock the boat. As she stepped into the light, the audience's collective gaze pierced her skin, prompting adrenaline to surge like fire coursing through her body. The sheer weight of their scrutiny momentarily paralyzed her. But she recalled the stories of women who had defied the odds, their voices echoing like a rallying cry in the depths of her mind. Each step toward the microphone felt heavy, yet liberating, a dichotomy she welcomed. "Mr. Blackstone," she began, her voice steady as she forced eye contact with him. "You've painted the narrative of worth that tries to dismiss my humanity. You equate class with value, but I am here to show you otherwise." The words rolled off her tongue like molten lava, and with each declaration, her body felt lighter, a burgeoning sense of self enveloping her like a cloak. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She noticed the abrupt shift in energy. Surprise dulled the laughter that had previously echoed so confidently. Richard's smug veneer began to crack, and in that moment, the world before her shifted. Power surged through her, a realization igniting within. What had once felt scalable was now attainable. This wasn't merely about revenge. It was about owning her story and demanding respect. She recounted her journey, detailing her sacrifices, and the countless nights spent wishing for a future brighter than the one dictated by her circumstances. Each anecdote was punctuated with passion, transforming what had once been shame into fierce pride. By the end of her speech, a hush fell over the audience. The silence echoed louder than any cacophony of derision Richard had summoned. A fire kindled in her belly, igniting a courage she barely recognized. "Your laughter won't define me. I am more than your disdain," she proclaimed, her voice rising above any doubt. The applause that gradually erupted turned from mere clapping to a standing ovation, lifting the weight off her shoulders. As she glanced around, she saw Emma's face shining with pride. A beacon of hope had ignited in her daughter's eyes, and through that reflection, Lily forged a path forward. But among the applause, the glint of rage flickered in Richard's eyes. She knew this wasn't over. Richard had feet firmly planted in his empire, and if he felt his authority threatened, he'd strike back. "Soon you'll realize I am not a fleeting whisper in your world," she thought, the tension coiling tightly in her chest. She steeled herself. The battle ahead was uncharted, filled with unforgiving twists, and this was merely the prologue of her resistance. What awaited her in this fractured landscape of power and pride? Would she navigate the intricacies of Richard's wrath, or risk everything for freedom? Lily had taken her first step toward reclaiming her narrative, but the repercussions of exposure could shatter more than just the facade. The real test loomed dangerously close. With the applause still ringing in her ears, Lily stepped away from the microphone, the weight of her declaration settling upon her with dizzying intensity. The thrill of vulnerability and power twisted within her, reminding her of the stakes. Her heart thrummed, a blend of excitement and dread. She had launched the first strike. Now she had to brace for the counterattack. Emerging from the spotlight, she caught a glimpse of Emma, whose beaming smile radiated pride. But even that brightness held a shadow of fear, a recognition that this was far from over. They had survived one battle, but the war with Richard was just beginning. The thought tightened Lily's throat. She needed to fortify her defenses, anticipating his retaliatory tactics. Yet something within her whispered that this was a moment for action, not retreat. In the days that followed, the initial euphoria of her speech soon mingled with the chill of reality. Despite the standing ovation, whispers of doubt echoed in dark corners of her mind. Had she truly stood up for herself, or merely exposed herself as an easy target? Richard's empire loomed large, and her victory, albeit fleeting, was surrounded by threats she hadn't fully comprehended. Motivated by her desire to understand Richard's power dynamic, Lily began to diligently observe him through professional circles and social media. She discovered a rhythm to his machinations, marketing stunts designed to enhance his image, subtle manipulations that reinforced his position, all built upon the foundation of fear and disdain he'd long cultivated. Yet, within his veneer of control, Lily spotted weaknesses, fractures in the facade ripe for exploitation. Determined, she delved deeper into the world of professional networking, navigating the complexities of social interactions with newfound resolve. She started attending industry events, at first feeling like a fish out of water. The men and women who moved with confidence in polished shoes and tailored suits seemed galaxies away from her roots. Yet she pressed on, honing her own presence. Each conversation was a step toward dismantling her identity as simply the help. One evening, after an invigorating panel discussion on women in leadership, she unexpectedly found herself seated next to a senior executive known for her fierce reputation, someone who had thrived within the very circles that had once belittled Lily. The woman's direct gaze bore into Lily's, an unspoken challenge lingering in the air. "You have potential," she said, her voice smooth yet commanding. "But potential means nothing without action. Do you have any plans to advance in your career?" In that moment, a flicker of vulnerability threatened to loop back around her. But recalling the courage she found on stage, a sanguine determination shone through. "I'm ready to carve my own path," she replied, meeting the executive's gaze unwaveringly. "That's a start, but intention isn't enough," the woman replied, an inscrutable smile playing on her lips. "You must align your intentions with strategic execution." Realizing this conversation was more than mere dialogue, Lily began to strategize actively. If she was to confront the looming specter of Richard, she needed allies, weapons forged from knowledge and insight. As days melted into weeks, she faced practical challenges, new responsibilities, late-night studying, and moments of crippling self-doubt. But each challenge was laced with a determination she'd never known. Gaining proficiency in negotiation and conflict resolution, she began drafting ideas for a project that would not only elevate her career, but put a spotlight on the very class divisions Richard thrived on. Lily was carving a path, straight into the heart of the storm. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to upend the entire structure of power that had held her at bay. And yet, within that burning ambition lived fear. What if Richard retaliated brutally, as she suspected he would? The tension hung thick, poised for eruption. With her newfound allies and a burgeoning plan taking shape, she prepared to confront the very core of his empire. But the question remained: what would her decision unleash? How far was she willing to go to reclaim her narrative? The echo of Richard's laughter haunted her, and she realized that soon she would face the moment that could either liberate her or lead to ruin. When would the time come to finally confront him? And what would she risk in that pursuit of freedom? Little did she know, the storm was gathering, and hidden elements were beginning to surface. Lily's days transitioned into a blurred routine of meetings, research, and relentless self-evaluation. She toiled away late into the night, reshaping notes from her encounters, sifting through volumes of industry literature, and piecing together the strategic framework for her project. Her aspirations had shifted from merely surviving in Richard's world to dismantling its very foundations. Yet with every new connection she forged and every meeting she attended, the burden of uncertainty weighed heavily on her. The reality of her situation seeped into her bones. The glare of the corporate spotlight came with its own kind of heat. She was not just reconstructing her career. She was initiating a revolution against a man who thrived on intimidation and control. Every interaction felt like a tightrope walk, balancing between asserting her newfound voice and guarding herself against the inevitable backlash she anticipated from Richard. One evening, as she looked out over the city from her tiny apartment, she recalled the visceral feeling of her declaration before the audience. It had ignited something within her, a flicker of defiance that spiraled toward an inferno. But that flicker was now tempered by the shadows of doubt creeping closer. What if she exposed herself as a target instead of a challenger? A sigh escaped her lips, an involuntary confession of her fears. The following morning, fueled by lingering anxieties and a fierce resolve, Lily decided to confront her self-doubt head-on. She registered for a negotiation workshop touted as transformative. It promised not only skills, but a network of influential women eager to share insights. Unbeknownst to her, this choice marked a critical pivot point in her budding career. At the workshop, Lily felt both exhilarated and frightened. The classroom buzzed with energy as accomplished women shared their stories, each journey a tapestry woven with moments of struggle and triumph. Observing the participants, she realized that these women were living proof that success was within reach, but it demanded sacrifice, grit, and the willingness to take risks. When it was her turn to share her story, she surprised herself. The words flowed from her as she recounted her previous feelings of being unseen, the humiliation from Richard, and the bold decision to rise. The room fell silent, the gravity of her experience resonating deeply among her peers. The vulnerability she had once feared transformed into her badge of honor, a realization that the very pain she had sought to hide could be a source of power. By the end of the workshop, she had formed a bond with several participants, including a mentor who recognized her potential. The woman, a high-ranking executive with years of experience navigating corporate treachery, offered insights that would prove invaluable. Don't chase the approval of those who undermine you. Instead, let your work speak for itself, she advised, her tone firm yet warm. Lily left the workshop invigorated. The intensity of her fears had diminished, replaced by a sense of agency. She began to outline her project in earnest, gathering data on gender disparities related to Richard's operations. This was not merely an academic exercise. It was her foundation, a solid base from which to launch her confrontation. However, as she delved deeper, a chilling discovery emerged. Richard had recently repositioned his influence, ensuring that he would maintain control over emerging sides in the industry. The walls around his empire were fortified, and dilapidated sections she once thought easy to exploit appeared more resilient than she had anticipated. Lily processed this revelation amid the adrenaline surging through her. This was a game now, and she was far from ready to surrender. She felt the quiet tremor of urgency. Time was slipping through her fingers, and she needed to establish a tactical advantage before Richard struck back. Determined, she poured the clarity she had gained into her project. Each statistic, every narrative she gathered, became a weapon in her arsenal. The moment to unveil her findings and confront Richard loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon, an inescapable reckoning that both thrilled and terrified her. Would this ultimately bring about her liberation, or would she become ensnared in Richard's web? As she prepared to challenge the very world that had sought to suppress her, one question burned brightly in her mind. Was she ready to maneuver through the labyrinth of power and deception? The clock was ticking down, and the stage was set for confrontation. Beyond the calculations and plans, Lily's resolve solidified. But in the depths of her mind lurked an unsettling thought. What if Richard's retaliatory strike was more catastrophic than she could fathom? The workshop had injected a fierce sense of purpose into Lily, but lingering fears gnawed at her resolve. She returned to her apartment with a whirlwind of thoughts, Richard's imminent retaliation loomed like a storm cloud, yet she was armed with newfound knowledge and a network of women who believed in her. Each data point she collected deepened her understanding of the corporate landscape she was striving to penetrate. Ideally, she envisioned the final presentation, her culmination of research shining a spotlight on disparities that Richard would surely detest. The insects in her mind buzzed with anxiety. Could she truly challenge the legacy of a man who had effortlessly conditioned others to submit to his will? The closer she got to unveiling her findings, the more the shadows of doubt mulled behind her. She could feel the weight of their sting, particularly on the days dedicated to compiling her research. The spreadsheets began to weave a narrative, revealing patterns that were difficult to overlook. When women were involved, retention rates improved, productivity soared. Yet still, Richard's hierarchy remained exclusively male. Her mentor's advice echoed in her mind. Let your work speak for itself. A comforting mantra, but the fear of being dismissed by Richard made her stomach clench. In those moments, she targeted the very essence of her anxiety, probing into past experiences where she had allowed fear to dictate her pace, and she made a silent vow to not fall into that trap again. During a particularly grueling night, with too much coffee and too little sleep, she came across an article discussing a recent scandal involving Richard. A competitor had accused him of unethical practices, but the issue had been expertly sealed behind corporate walls. The timing was impeccable. It gave her the opportunity to leverage his past behaviors against him. If she could frame her findings meticulously, align them with this recent blight, she could potentially destabilize his empire. Lily spent days tailoring her presentation, integrating Richard's actions with her critical data. The culmination of her efforts was charged with anticipation and dread. She reached out to her mentor, seeking guidance. I'm ready to present, but what if I've miscalculated? She blurted out, her breath shaky. Her mentor leaned forward, concern etched on her face. Remember, Lily, knowledge is your shield. He may try to intimidate you, to belittle the numbers, but what you present is grounded in truth. The tides are shifting in corporate culture, and those who ignore it will find themselves caught in their own currents. Empowered by her mentor's words, Lily adjusted her posture and looked at her notes with newfound determination. She needed to prepare herself mentally, not only for the information, but to anticipate Richard's tactics. Confronting someone with his level of influence meant risking everything. She could either fall into the trap of fear or emerge valiantly in the chaos. The day of the presentation arrived, marked by an anxious stillness in her apartment. As she dressed, the reflection in the mirror became not just a facade, but a revelation. She summoned the confidence she had gathered over weeks of arduous work and peer inspiration. This was her moment to redefine who she was, not merely as Richard's subordinate, but as a force capable of shaking the very ground he walked upon. With each step toward the conference room, she could feel her heart pounding, yet with every beat, it synchronized with an awakening clarity. She was prepared to shift the dynamics of the room, to challenge the status quo with irrefutable evidence. The air grew thick around her, a prelude to the turbulence of confrontation. As she entered, the meeting began with the expected pleasantries, the usual exchanges that masked deeper tensions. But as she spoke, her confidence surged. She articulated her research with precision, emphasizing the need for change. Richard sat at the head of the table, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the implications of her findings. Then she unfolded her plan, the strategy that would hold Richard accountable. The atmosphere crackled with electricity as she finished. The room was hers, and for the first time, the adage seemed true. Knowledge was power. But just as the applause began to ripple through the room, Richard's composure cracked. A dangerous glint ignited in his eyes. The challenge had been laid, but what awaited Lily in the aftermath would redefine the stakes. In that charged moment, she realized this was not merely a presentation, but the beginning of an all-out war for her agency. Little did she know, Richard was already plotting his next move. Would he retaliate or attempt to discredit her? As she soaked in the applause, Lily felt an unsettling chill crawl down her spine, a premonition that the true confrontation had only just begun. Lily felt the rush of adrenaline still coursing through her veins as the initial applause faded into murmurs. However, that fleeting high evaporated quickly, replaced by the acute awareness of Richard's penetrating gaze locked onto her. It felt like a duel, his eyes narrowing, weighing her confidence against the remnants of his power. "Interesting presentation, Lily," he said slowly, the words dripping with condescension. "But data can be manipulated to fit any narrative, can it?" His voice had transformed, smooth yet taunting, aimed at chipping away the walls she had just erected. "Actually, Richard, these figures are concrete representations of our current workplace dynamics. I believe they speak for themselves," Lily replied, her resolve hardening despite the tremor in her voice. The room remained abuzz, the tension palpable. Doubts flickered at the edges of her mind like dark wings keen on consuming her confidence. She briefly considered the risk she took by exposing Richard, but abandoning the fight wasn't an option. She could either defend her work or watch as he dismantled it brick by brick. As the meeting transitioned, Richard began to pivot the conversation, drawing in allies like it was his innate ability. "Let's be cautious here," he stated, directing attention to his trusted colleagues. "Our current practices have led to great success. Are we really willing to entertain unfounded claims based on selectively chosen data?" The laughter from the group, his comfortable circle, served only to fuel her fire. Lily's mind clicked into overdrive. This wasn't just about the research anymore. It was about her credibility, the professional persona she had forged through sheer determination. She scrambled internally for a counter. "Richard, can you provide evidence that dismisses my findings?" she challenged, emboldened by the support she had gathered among the other women in the office who were hungry for change. She saw their faces shift, curiosity peaking as Richard squirmed momentarily. He was stalling, which emboldened her. "If we are going to consider this a discussion, then everything has to be on the table," she said firmly. Richard's smile faded, morphing into frigid professionalism. Though he attempted to regain control, she had flipped the narrative. "I can align my research with the findings of respected institutions that have highlighted the importance of gender diversity in leadership. For example," she continued, weaving facts into her argument with increasingly audacious ease, reclaiming the air in the room. Gradually, she noticed the begrudging acknowledgement in some faces as attention turned away from Richard. No longer just Richard's presentation. The room was cocooning around her. Yet, as she concluded, the applause was still tinged with uncertainty. Richard offered a sharp exhale, like he had just pulled a thread that might unravel everything. Though she could see the gears turning in his mind, she needed to be cautious. His retaliation would be strategic, not elaborate. In the days that followed, her victory felt like a Pyrrhic one. Although her peers praised her courage, she sensed Richard's growing disdain turning into calculated moves against her. Whispers in the corridors hinted at a mysterious retaliation brewing beneath the surface. A mean-spirited rumor echoed here. A discredited whisper bounced there. Instead of succumbing to fear, the realization dawned on her. Time to harness this chaos. She sought out individuals in her network who were aware of corporate strategies and intimidation tactics. Together, she began reframing her approach, preparation over reaction, fortifying her position where Richard's tactics threatened her credibility. Late nights became her constant companions, sorting through potential legal traps and corporate strategies, while forming alliances with those who had once hesitated, but now longed for a change. Each conversation unveiled layers of support. People she hadn't considered allies were revealing themselves, eager to counterbalance Richard's isolating grip on power. Lily structured her evidence meticulously, ensuring everything was beyond reproach. She became adept at legal frameworks and corporate ethics, her trajectory becoming less about survival and more about preempting, anticipating Richard's strategies. It was exhausting, but an invigorating kind of exhausting, where obscured truths bubbled to the surface, taking her growth from simple resistance to outright empowerment. Just as she felt she was getting ahead, an unexpected email popped into her inbox. A late-night request from Richard himself, requesting to meet. Beneath it all, a niggling doubt crept forth. What if he had a devastating countermeasure prepared? Lily's breathing quickened as she considered her options. The choice had just materialized. Would she play his game, or trap him in his own? As the hour for their meeting approached, her mind raced, contemplating if this could indeed be her next finest hour, or the brink of a downward spiral. In that moment of silence before the inevitable confrontation, she steadied herself with one thought. She was no longer just a challenger of Richard. She was his reckoning. Lily paced the floor of her apartment, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of her laptop as she replayed Richard's email in her mind. Late-night request to meet was deceptively simple, but she knew better than to underestimate him. Every interaction felt like a carefully plotted chess match, designed to either reclaim his power or dismantle hers. Choosing her outfit became a ritual infused with significance. She dressed deliberately, favoring a tailored blazer that signified authority, deep navy, reminiscent of her strategic blueprints. Hair pulled back into a tight bun, her reflection in the mirror bore the demeanor of a conquering warrior. She was both nervous and resolute, ready to dismantle the tension crackling in the air. Arriving at the conference room, the sterile aroma of polished wood and high-end corporate design wrapped around her. Richard was already seated, his posture a calculated blend of relaxed confidence and predator-like watchfulness. He looked up as she entered, and the flicker of recognition in his eyes unnerved her. This was the arena where reputations were forged or destroyed, and it threatened to break her. "Lily," he acknowledged, his voice as smooth as ever but underscored by an ear-splitting tension. "Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." "Let's get to the point, then," she replied, dismissing pleasantries. She steeled herself against the undercurrent of intimidation his presence caused. She was done acting like a bystander waiting for his approval. Richard leaned back, his fingers steepled as he contemplated her. "You've stirred quite a discussion with your recent findings. I'm curious. What do you hope to achieve with all of this?" She took a breath, gathering the composed demeanor she had rehearsed. "What I hope to achieve, Richard, is an honest dialogue about improving our workplace dynamics. What you choose to see as stirring discussion, I see as an urgent need for change." His smile returned, but this time it was colder, more calculated. "You know, people have short memories in this industry. Whispers can become roars, Lily. How do you plan to defend yourself now that there are murmurs about your credibility?" Her mind raced at the implication. He was attempting to shake her resolve. "I've strategically built a coalition of support, Richard. Allies are aware of the discrepancies in our current practices. They trust my findings and will back me. You should know by now that I am not alone in this." "Ah, the power of numbers," he retorted, his tone betraying irritation. "But isn't that also a risky game? Unity can fracture under the slightest pressure." As he spoke, something within her shifted. It was no longer just about defending her research or the righteousness of her cause. The stakes were about resilience and the strength to enact meaningful change, fueled by the undeniable truth that lingered in her heart. "Maybe you should consider that protecting your empire requires a different perspective on power," she dared to declare, the words spilling forth from a newfound reservoir of courage. His expression soured slightly. "Careful now. You don't want to anger the wrong people." "Or perhaps I'm no longer afraid of them," she countered sharply, the realization dawning that fear wielded a power of its own. Surviving this encounter meant reclaiming her narrative and shifting the power balance. Richard's thinly veiled hostility crackled through the air until he maintained a tight-lipped smile. I suggest you tread carefully moving forward. I might have the capacity to redirect this narrative back to you if you aren't cautious. Only if you underestimate me, she replied with quiet conviction, taking stock of her growing assertiveness. Each word felt like a shield, empowering her resolve as the shift in her internal atmosphere solidified. As they continued, they circled each point like graceful combatants, their words a dance of strategy and instincts. The realization sparked. She was growing in the very intensity of this confrontation, awakening insights she had buried before. Eventually, Richard rose from his seat, his gaze locking onto hers with a calculated daring. Let's see how far your confidence carries you when the game shifts. The tension settled thickly between them, but it was Lily's heart that raced, fueled by a newfound understanding. What had begun as a battle against Richard was transforming into a confrontation with herself, her fears, her limitations, and the power she had yet to fully embrace. As she walked away, a percolating sense of liberation ignited within her. What Richard didn't know was that she was discarding vulnerability in exchange for an empowering resolve. No longer his opponent, she was emerging as a force of change. Yet looming in the back of her mind lingered the shadow of Richard's threats. The stakes had risen. She could feel it. As she stepped outside into the crisp air, uncertainty kissed at her heels. She knew retaliation was inevitable, but this time, she was more than ready. She was prepared to disrupt the very systems that threatened to ensnare her. And as she headed to her office, her heart raced, not with anxiety, but with anticipation of the confrontation ahead that could either reshape her narrative or solidify her role as a powerful contender in a game rigged against her. As the door swung open to familiar chaos, an unexpected figure appeared, someone she hadn't anticipated entering this narrative with her. The question loomed. Could this unexpected ally tip the scales in her favor? Lily stepped into her office, the familiar buzz of conversations and ringing phones momentarily distracting her from the heaviness of her thoughts. She shook off the remnants of her encounter with Richard, but the coldness of their confrontation lingered on her skin like a chill. It wasn't merely the impending threat that filled her with a sense of dread. It was the fact that she was no longer the timid analyst who waited for approval. She had tasted the essence of her power, and it was intoxicating. Her eyes landed on a figure she hadn't expected. Daniel, a colleague from her team known for his sharp insights and allegiance to her cause. He stood near her desk, arms crossed, his stance betraying a mix of concern and admiration. He met her gaze with a calm that momentarily steadied her racing heart. "Lily," he began, his voice a quiet anchor in the storm swirling around them. "I heard about your meeting with Richard. You really held your own." She nodded, and for a split second, doubt flickered within her. Did I? Or did I simply provoke a larger battle? Daniel shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you stood your ground. This is different. You're different. You keep talking about change. Maybe it's time you take the lead in manifesting it." His words hung in the air, a challenge woven into his encouragement. For months, she had been forging alliances, gathering data and testimonies, and yet the thought of stepping beyond her consultative role brought a semblance of anxiety. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Leverage your findings. Present to management directly. Build the case for our proposal yourself, and let them see the data, the support. Not only will it elevate your credibility, but it might also serve as a way to counter any whispers." As he spoke, a flicker of realization ignited in Lily's mind. That was it. The approach she had feared was exactly what she needed. To confront her fears instead of sidestepping them. If she presented the findings herself, not only would it fortify her position, but it would also position her as an authentic leader who was committed to reform. "Perhaps I can reshape the narrative after all," she whispered, her resolve hardening like steel. Daniel smiled, encouraged by her shift. "Exactly. You have a team that believes in you. Let them know you're in this fight. We'll rally our resources, organize meetings, whatever it takes. We stand united." For the first time, she felt the weight lifting. Richard's threats seemed less like mountains and more like opportunities to solidify her credibility and unleash her potential. Yet, lurking within her mind was a more disturbing unease that loomed as a consequence of this new direction. "What about Richard?" she voiced, cautious of the shadows that still loomed over her path. "There are always risks," Daniel admitted, "but isolating ourselves is a risk in itself. With your findings, we have the justification to challenge not just him, but the system that allows his toxic practices to thrive." His encouragement spiraled into action inside her mind. The conceptualization she had long mulled over could become tangible through her new platform. Presentation skills, strategic advocacy, and digital storytelling, each piece of her skill set began to align. Lily leaned forward, excitement coursing through her veins. "Let's set a date for a presentation. I want to frame the narrative not just for myself, but for the whole team. We should let our voices be heard, empower everyone affected by these discrepancies." Daniel nodded, his approval validating her eagerness. But beneath the thrill of empowerment lay the quiet realization that this confrontation with Richard would likely escalate. "Yes," he agreed. "You'll shake things up, but expect pushback. These discussions can become personal quickly." As the final word settled in her mind, she felt the weight of responsibility intertwine with her anticipation. There was no turning back now. She was on a trajectory to illuminate shadows in her workplace, a mover, not merely a bystander. However, as visions of her proposed presentation sparked excitement in her chest, a deeper fear unfurled. She pondered what Richard would unleash in retaliation. As they began strategizing their plan, a message dinged on her phone, cutting through the ambient noise of the office. The sender was an unrecognized number. Intrigued, she opened it to reveal 3 short words that sent a shiver down her spine. "Meet me tonight." A wave of uncertainty washed over her. The very prospect of collusion or betrayal dared to choke her resolve. Who could be reaching out? And why now, as she was finally gaining momentum? The stakes were raised, and Lily knew one thing for certain. She was walking a tightrope, where one misstep could unravel the ground she stood upon. With determination flaring amidst the echoes of doubt, she understood the time for shelter was over. This was now her moment to face the unknown. Would she rise to the challenge, or would the narrative flip once again beneath her feet? Lily's heart raced as the room around her faded, consumed by the implications of that text. "Meet me tonight." The lull of the office buzz became a distant hum, eclipsed by the urgency thumping in her chest. Was this someone trying to help her, or was it another trap laid by Richard? She needed clarity. The conversations at her desk blurred into background noise as she stared into the screen, the 3 words haunting her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she considered her options. Answer? Ignore? Her instincts screamed caution, but fear waged war against her promise to confront the emerging narrative. "Lily?" Daniel's query pierced through her reverie. She blinked, refocusing on him, his brow furrowed with concern, catching her drift into uncertainty. "I need to think," she said, keeping her voice firm despite the tempest brewing inside her mind. "Is everything okay?" His tone was laced with a hint of apprehension. "It's just this message I received." She hesitated, weighing her options. Sharing too much might create unnecessary panic, yet withholding information could breed distrust. Announcing her internal turmoil seemed like a vulnerability she wasn't ready to expose. "Is it about Richard?" Daniel prodded gently, perceptive as always. "No, not directly. Someone reached out to me." She took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling around potential scenarios. "I don't know who they are." Daniel straightened, interest piqued. "Could it be someone who wants to support your proposal?" Your findings? Maybe, but the timing feels off. If you think it's worth pursuing, maybe it's aligned with your fight, he countered, skillfully redirecting her focus. This is a chance to assert yourself even further. Tentatively, she nodded, feeling the weight of his encouragement. Discovering alliances could fortify her efforts against Richard. You're right. I just have to proceed with caution. As the hours stretched on and the office began to empty, Lily remained immersed in her preparations for the presentation. Each piece of data she compiled felt like armor against the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The initial excitement had transformed into an electric tension, underscoring her evolution. She was no longer retreating. She was actively molding her narrative, at work and in her life. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in crisp hues of orange and pink. Time slipped through her fingers, beckoning her to make a decision about the mysterious text. With the weight of her responsibilities fresh in her mind, she realized she could not avoid the meeting. There were facets of her life she needed to examine, and perhaps this encounter would bring one of those hidden elements to light. After sending off a quick reply, saying she'd be there, she steadied her breath. Heart rate synchronized with her intent. She was no longer passive, waiting for approval or validation. She was stepping into an arena she'd long avoided, yet felt destined to confront. As she exited her office, the sharp night air awoke her senses, galvanizing her resolve. This was more than just a response to Richard's aggression. This was a journey toward self-discovery and leadership. She had the opportunity to replace intimidation with empowerment, weaving a new destiny. Just as she reached her car, her phone buzzed again. This time her heart plummeted. The message read swiftly across the screen. Change of plans. I can't meet you tonight. Lily stared at the words, confusion knitting her brow. Who was pulling back now, and why? In that moment, the stakes escalated, and the tides of her journey shifted painfully. She had taken a step forward, only to be yanked back into murky waters. With determination anchoring her feet, she resolved to follow this thread. The urgency foreshadowed deeper connections, perhaps even alliances she didn't yet see. But what was escalating behind the scenes? Lily pulled herself together. There were still steps to be taken, and this meeting wasn't over. With gritty determination set ablaze in her heart, she knew whatever lay ahead would demand everything she was. In an instant, clarity struck. She had to take control back, not just from Richard, but from the shadows of uncertainty creeping in. As she drove away, a deeper urgency surged within her. Who had tried to derail her efforts? And what were the stakes of this escalating game? Her determination surged. The confrontation loomed, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The time had come to face not just Richard, but the hidden forces arrayed against her. As she clenched the steering wheel, ready to navigate this treacherous road ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. And in the distance, the shadows loomed large. What price would she pay for the clarity she desperately sought? The evening was an unrelenting cacophony of doubt and determination, as Lily approached the dimly lit cafe where she had arranged to meet her unidentified contact. Under the surface of her resolve lay a pulse of anxiety that quickened with each step. Could this meeting truly serve as an ally in her fight against Richard? Or was it yet another layer in a complicated web of deceit? Taking a deep breath, she opened the door, the warm glow of the cafe enveloping her but failing to dispel her tension. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries wafted through the air, but it did little to quell the storm swirling in her chest. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on a familiar face. Daniel? He stood at the back, leaning over a small table with an expression that was both eager and concerned. I thought it would be better if I was the one to reach out, he explained as she approached. The tension that had crackled in the air between them began to dissipate lightly. Why didn't you just come to me at the office? She asked, trying to mask the relief that washed over her. The nervous edge deflated slightly with familiarity. "Because things are escalating quickly," he replied, his eyes darting around as if assessing potential threats. "Richard might not take your push for reform lightly. I was worried about how he'd react if he caught wind of your plans." Lily's heart sank. She hadn't just anticipated his retaliation. She had been preparing for it. "I appreciate you wanting to meet, but we can't allow Richard to dictate our actions. We need to knock down his empire brick by brick," she stated, her resolve solidifying once more. Daniel nodded, but didn't seem convinced. "And that's why I gathered some insights. You need to be ready for the counterstrike he's preparing. We can't be his pawns anymore, but pushing too hard too soon could backfire." His words hung in the air, echoing her own apprehensions. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms in contemplation. She knew they were at a crossroads. If she wanted to transform how she and others similar to her were perceived, they had to take bold steps, but she needed a plan that would ensure safety. "I have the support of my team," she said, her voice firm but introspective. "If they see me taking a stand, they'll rally around me. I can empower them, create a movement of change." Daniel's face softened, yet his skepticism remained. "That's if Richard doesn't leverage his influence first. His position is entrenched and he plays dirty. We've seen it happen before." Lily's determination intensified. "Exactly. Which is why I need to go in with a solid presentation that lays the foundation for my research and exposes his misconduct. The facts will speak for themselves." With a determined glint in her eyes, she laid out the structure of her presentation, detailing her findings and how they would not only improve the workplace, but expose Richard's unethical practices. Daniel listened intently, nodding slowly as her passion ignited. "Let's plan a mock presentation," he proposed, his tone a mix of admiration and reluctance. "If we can anticipate Richard's tactics, we can counter them before he retaliates." Lily felt a surge of excitement. "Perfect. With your input, we can make it bulletproof." They spent the next few hours developing strategies and refining her approach. The tension that had cloaked her earlier began to lift as she absorbed Daniel's insights. Each iteration of her arguments felt sharper, forming a kind of protective armor against any potential fallout. The night wore on, and as they wrapped up, Daniel leaned forward, determination etched on his face. "Lily, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're laying the groundwork for everyone impacted by Richard's reign. This is bigger than any one of us." His words struck a chord deep within. She was no longer just the cleaner who had tried to remain invisible. She was an architect of change, a force capable of challenging the status quo with strategic acumen. After their meeting, she returned home, her heart brimming with a cocktail of anxiety and determination. The impending confrontation with Richard weighed heavily on her, but now it felt tinged with the thrill of potential victory. Each challenge she faced was another thread woven into the fabric of her rising narrative. As the days counted down to the presentation, she immersed herself in preparation, working late into the nights. She transformed her anxiety into fuel. Each statistic became a testament to her journey. On the day of her presentation, she stepped into the conference room with solid confidence, the room buzzing with anticipation. She glanced at the familiar faces of her team, and their belief in her galvanizing spirit radiated throughout the space. Today is the day, Lily thought, fortifying her heart for the battle ahead. When she began the presentation, the first few slides were a reminder of her empirical findings and an unflinching analysis of the workplace culture Richard had perpetuated. She could feel Richard's disdain like a palpable force, but she pressed on, the enthusiasm of her team echoing behind her. Change is not only necessary, it is inevitable if we want to thrive as an organization, Lily championed as she shared the outreach efforts from her peers, standing firm against Richard's scrutiny. As the presentation concluded, a dull silence settled before timid applause began to ripple through the audience. For the first time, she felt the respect she had sought, and her heart soared. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victorious statement for all who had suffered in silence. Then came the moment she had anticipated. Richard stood up, his expression carved into a mask of disdain that matched the disdainful comments he had made at the gala. Interesting assertions, Lily, but you must consider the repercussions of challenging established hierarchies. Lily's breath caught for only a split second. The real repercussions lie in remaining stagnant while the world around us evolves, she countered, her tone unwavering. The room fell into a tense quiet, the air thick with unspoken confrontations. "Are you prepared for what lies ahead, Richard?" she demanded. "This isn't just a battle of numbers. This is about our integrity." His expression flickered, hinting at turmoil abated beneath a veneer of confidence. She had struck a nerve, and with it, the tide shifted. No longer trapped beneath the weight of his condescension, she continued confidently, owning her place in this battle. The internal development she had cultivated took root in her soul, granting her the strength to face adversities as they unfolded. As discussions continued, support cascaded around her, shifting the narrative within the room. Each voice bolstered her own, resonating echoes of a future where power dynamics could tilt. And as the meeting closed, a sense of cathartic triumph surged through her. She hadn't just confronted Richard. She had reclaimed her story, reshaping personal and collective endeavors. The battle had just begun, but this time, she would no longer stand alone, empowered by her transformation. Outside, the world awaited, bright and full of possibilities. This was her moment, one that demanded clarity and steadfastness. She had navigated the unknowns and emerged victorious, forging ahead into her rightful place in the future. And as she walked back into the light, she knew that resilience wasn't just about survival, it was about triumphing over doubt and redefining success. Now it's your turn to engage. This is the moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and uplift more stories like this. Comment your reactions and theories about this incredible ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformative journey. Don't wait even one more second. Let's continue to inspire change together.